Great. Thank you for joining us today on this panel discussion. As we join, we have some tremendous panelists here today as we talk about innovation, technology, and gender. And what, we have panelists who've joined us from across the world who have come with a plethora of experience from their regions and from across the globe. And it is such an honor to be here with these panelists today. Just a few housekeeping things that I wanted to mark out. There is a translation button at the bottom. So if you need translation, request you to please go ahead and click on that. And that hopefully is helpful for you. With that in mind, I don't want to spend too much time on other things and jump right into this topic of technology, gender, and what the ecosystem is right now, keeping in mind, especially the pandemic that has now affected all of us. So, one of the things that COVID-19 has done is essentially enunciate the gap which exists for women with access to technology and what that means. And essentially, what we're hoping to do today is to look at that question from three different lenses. One is to look at the question from the sense of what does it mean for women to have access to technology? And we have some panelists who are going to talk about that. What does it mean having access to internet? What does it mean having access to services on technology and internet particularly? The second piece that we're looking at is certainly examples of what happens when women do have access to technology. How does that translate into something good? What does impact look like on the ground? And so kind of the more tangibles and action-oriented insights. And then the third is, what do we learn from this? The gap, the pandemic has certainly increased the gap when it comes to being able to see who has access to internet and technology. And so something which we would want to focus on as we kind of close the session is to see what do we do from a policy perspective, what do we do from an action perspective, as respective leaders from civil society across the world, from governments, from policymaking, from private sector. How do we pull this together and make sure that the access to technology only increases with time? With that context being set, let me go ahead and open it up for to our panelists. I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists and their background as questions are posed to them. And then I look forward to hearing from them. Just in terms of structure, we'll have a brief panel discussion and then we will follow it up with question and answers from you as participants. So I'm very much looking forward to this. And Subha, let me get started with you, in fact. You've talked a lot about agency and being, from CREA and being in Sri Lanka. You have a wonderful background, both in terms of South Asia, but also in terms of globally, on what does it mean for women to have access to internet and technology? And what does that agency mean at large? What has your experience been during the pandemic and then even before that in terms of access to internet for women?
Thanks so much, Rwitwika, and it's really a great pleasure to be here with you and with all of you. And I just want to clarify that I am from Sri Lanka, and I was in Sri Lanka until about 4 weeks ago, and I'm based in New York now. So it's been an interesting shift. But yeah, I mean, just for those folks who don't know, CREA is a global feminist human rights organization led by feminists in the global South. And at CREA, we believe that more feminist organizations and more actors in feminist movements should be engaging critically with the issue of technology. More often than not, feminist organizations' engagements with technology have historically been through looking at technology instrumentally, right, as a tool. to further our campaigns, to amplify advocacy messages, to visibilize our work to donors, other partners, etc. The other approach, which I think you've already named, has typically been to try and resolve issues of access through advocating for the creation of more technological infrastructure. I think it's become very clear now that technology is much more than that, right? So CREA's approach to technology is to understand it as a domain, a site of inequality, a site of resistance, a site which contains some of the really important political debates and questions of our time. And as feminists, of course, we have to be there, right? We have been there for many decades, though our interventions and contributions to the field of technology as theorists, as makers and builders, as defenders are often relegated to invisibility. But we need to be there to bring the structural analysis, to draw attention to the ways in which simply building or investing more in technological infrastructure alone won't solve issues of access. That until we address the root causes of social and structural inequality, of inequity, of exclusion, we're not going to find the answers. And CREA's own journey with working at the intersections of gender, sexuality, technology, and human rights began a few years ago because we are always looking to see where the path is leading us and trying to understand how we need to grow and expand our own learning and thinking to really understand where feminist movements need to go next. And that's why I can sit here and urge others like we did and are doing to start taking the issue of technology seriously and to increase feminist engagement with it globally. But of course, we don't do it alone, right? We need each other. And so on that note, I want to give a big shout out to our teachers, right? Our partners, colleagues in deeply dedicated feminist networks and organizations working on technology. In particular, the Association for Progressive Communications, a global network for civil society organizations working on technology and rights. The folks at APC have been pioneers in this field and have been strengthening feminist movements' critical engagement with these issues for decades now. There are also many exciting attempts by feminists across the global South, right? For example, Point of View in Mumbai, Luchadoras in Mexico, founded by Lulu here, to reclaim the internet, the domain of technology, as one that belongs to us. And finally, Rwitwika, you raised the word of agency, and that's something which drives CREA's work on technology. As you rightly, as we sort of discussed before when we were preparing for this session, online spaces are increasingly exposing women's human rights defenders to more and more risk, right? Both online and on ground, and we know that. Authoritarian governments are using online space in collusion with corporations to surveil human rights defenders, to criminalize and penalize them, and finally to silence dissent. Online spaces are used to troll and harass feminists, especially queer and trans people, in the hopes that this will push us out. Governments deploy internet shutdowns in places where they know they would otherwise be held accountable for large-scale human rights abuses. But indisputably, as you just noted when you opened this session, online space has always been and continues to be a space for collectivizing and organizing solidarity and pleasure. Importantly, it's a space to exercise our agency. And that is why, as feminists, we fight to defend it. At CREA, we are interested in both autonomy and agency. And therefore, we decided that we have no choice but to engage critically with the domain of technology, since technology significantly shapes our experiences of autonomy and agency both so much nowadays. And the online space has become so critical to our lives, and understanding its relationships with our rights, as we think is so important, that at CREA now we understand online space to be a domain of civic space, right? So while often feminists, including and especially non-binary, intersex, trans folks, sex workers, Dalit women, basically those from already structurally excluded groups, while they experience the violence of the contraction of civic space the worst in some ways, they also fight the hardest to defend it, because we know that space to articulate our vision for the future and to demand our rights is essential to democracy and to social justice. So the project of a free and equitable internet and free non-corporate technologies dedicated to a just future and a livable planet, we think should be core to any feminist mandate. And I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Subha. That was very insightful, and again, kudos on the work that you're doing. You raised a point about trans people and essentially what that means, excluded groups. And on that note, Xonorika, Kira, I want to turn to you in terms of, you've spoken quite a bit about Paraguay and your experience there, and essentially about certain groups being excluded from that. Picking up from what Shubha mentioned, it would be great if you can share a bit from your own experience and then what your thinking is in terms of trans people having access to internet and technology.
Yes, thank you, Rwitwika. I would like to thank, of course, again, the trans communities of thinkers, organizers, activists, and advocates in Latin America. Without the work, I wouldn't be here today. And of course, everyone at Outright and at the UN for inviting me to this very important event. And as you said, it is challenging when we think of technology and accessibility for trans communities in global South countries, especially global South countries which have the lowest percentage of social mobility in terms of economic improvement and access to quality life conditions. So I would like to first talk about the context of Paraguay in this instance, which is a country, like I said, has a low percentage of social mobility globally. It's at the bottom in Latin America, and which means that only a small fraction of society has access to financial health, which is associated as well with food security, housing, and healthcare. Um, but before we think about social mobility, which is the chance to improve life conditions, we should also look at the opportunity of access to university education, which in this country, less than 10% of trans people have access to it. And we have no statistics regarding the permanence of professional development afterward. Um, and at the moment, more than 90% of trans feminine people do some form of sex work under precarious conditions and amidst institutional violence, considering intersecting forms of discrimination which are disproportionately more violent with trans women and trans feminine people of color. Um, and of course, under COVID, this is even more precarious. So we also must take into account that there are no statistics of trans masculine non-binary people and how they access their source of income. And while this is an obvious reflection of state necropolitics that expose and pathologize the other bodies in a society where cisgender patriarchy is dominant and interreligious forces hold and abuse state power along overall corruption, um, and disregard for what is considered to go against national ideals. The effects of colonialism has been devastating. Only 5% of trans people have access to a formal workplace. And what does this look like in this landscape today? When we look at the technology, there has been an acceleration in the access of online platforms to access information and facilitate interaction in the time of social distancing. Technological devices that would benefit from free internet access, such as smartphones and laptops, are now indispensable. Uh, Bank cards and e-ticketing systems are also only accessible if you have access to a formal workplace. So that makes it incredibly complex for people to access financial help. Um, and because of discrimination, this is not guaranteed in the global south. Um, so there have been no capacities built on that regard. Um, and this is a result of a historic asymmetry of invisibility, exposure to violence due to the combined effects of discrimination, and a reflection in the lack of support of institutions in integrating trans people and their interactions in day-to-day basis. So the mechanisms that were designed to protect our lives have failed us. And we need to rethink how a more welcoming ecosystem would look like in the future in parallel as we develop public policies. Um, so I guess that it is important to talk about the recommendations, which are building capacities and conditions. The Global South has the resources to provide for the South. and the global north has the resources to provide for the south. Visibility has been a step forward, but is falling short without material reparations. Regionally in Latin America, we are at a moment in which we are working on strengthening our networks. And it's usually trans people who have some access to education, who have all the drive to carry out this laborious process. But most still lack the tools and that institutions and stakeholders could provide. Um, so to stakeholders, cultural change makers, and world leaders, funding as financial investment in life is restorative. It is reparations on material basis which builds collective relationships. From 2021 and on, we need to start thinking about tech security as much as we think of food security. Networks are an essential component of every society, which allow forms of agency, access to culture in a wider scope, and communication. Tech security, it is a human right. Pedagogical and technical instruction, integral comprehensive quotas are fundamental in remote training. This is an affirmative practice to help survivor, but to go beyond the threshold into prosperity, which is generating conditions for the development of skills and abilities. So to wrap up this, I want to encourage you to prioritize trans people, to connect with trans experts on these matters, with human rights activists, leaders, advocates, and policymakers, those who currently do not have the institutional, economic, and social tools to carry out the necessary transformations. But at the same time, to think about why are not trans experts on the matter occupying international platforms yet? Um, uh, what does the future of leadership look like? It is about being paid for the work as well, which is a practice that assigns value. And to think about how many trans co-workers do we have, you know? And the answer to this might be uncomfortable, but it's ultimately transformative. The importance of a specific trans quota is now more urgent than ever, as well as updating the means and methodologies of remote training so that this can become a reality. And it is fundamental here to mention that those who do not actively dismantle the traces of the necropolitics in their day-to-day practices are actively contributing to the perpetuation of the narratives of systemic scarcity and survival. And trans people deserve more and better, and cisgender people, our allies, must take responsibility in promoting and investing in trans talent as a redistributive practice that builds collective relationships.
Great. Thank you for that, Kira. That was very helpful. And, thank you to you and Subha for setting the context in terms of what is the policy requirement, what does the landscape look like right now when it comes to gender, trans communities and access to internet and technology. Shifting gears a little bit from what the landscape looks like and what the issues are, and kind of looking at things that have worked on the ground right now. I want to turn to Aisha. And, Aisha, you had mentioned before in terms of the work that UN Women is doing in Jordan, particularly with refugee women, and the kind of impact that you're having. It'd be great to hear in terms of like an action-oriented insight on what does access to technology and internet has meant for refugee women in your experience.
Thank you, Rwitwika, and good morning, good evening, everyone. Let me start by acknowledging that as one of the largest refugee hosting countries, Jordan has many success stories, despite many challenges that existed even before COVID-19. And now with the pandemic exacerbating the pre-existing vulnerabilities and inequalities, there is a greater need to invest in innovative tools and approaches that can help the most vulnerable women to not just survive, but also feel empowered. So in our experience, access to sustainable livelihood opportunities is the #1 priority for many of the women that we've been working with. UN Women is working with the Syrian refugee women in Zatari and Azra camps, and also the most vulnerable women in the host communities since 2012, providing them with the cash for work opportunities, which are linked to employment and micro businesses. And this is combined with support services such as childcare, education, protection, and safe transportation. But it was in 2018 when we got the opportunity to pilot an innovative approach by partnering with World Food Programme to use blockchain technology for transferring cash to refugee women. Now, this technology works in a very simple way to access their cash entitlements. Women go to supermarkets in the camps where an iris scan identifies and links them to their blockchain account, which is like a unique digital wallet. Now they can withdraw the money, they can use the funds to pay for their groceries, or simply check their account balances using this technology. So in the last 2 years, more than 871 refugee women have benefited from this service. But what does it actually mean for women to go beyond having access to money? It basically means that there is more choice and flexibility because they can withdraw the money at any time convenient to them, at any convenient location. And it also offers greater financial control and security because they are the only ones who can have access to that digital wallet, and they can also choose to save money, which, as we understand, is particularly important in the context of emergencies. And for many of these women, it was their first experience of having control over their finances. And it also means improved digital and financial literacy. We've been helping women to use mobile phones, to track their spending, to also get familiar with this technology. And because the system is fully managed remotely, it enabled us to reach out to the most vulnerable women during the COVID-19 lockdown in a seamless and safe manner. So when we talk about the impact, it's all about the difference that the technology is making in the lives of these women, which is far greater than any numbers that we are talking about. And when we hear from them that just having the option of saving the money, it has changed the way they spend the money and they think about their future. And it reminds us that, how at times small innovative interventions can make big differences. So I do also want to share here that the issue of gender-based digital exclusion is far more complex and bigger than simply having access to technology. Even when women have access to technology, they are more likely to be excluded from the opportunities that the technology has to offer because of multiple reasons and factors. And this is where we see the need for better understanding of those constraints and challenges, and also ensuring longer-term investments in gender-responsive technology and innovation. So I'm going to stop here for now.
Aisha, actually, I'll circle back to you later during the question and answer session. In fact, to Subha and Kira as well on this, the more nuanced issues with not just about it being access to it, but then what do you do with that? With that in mind, Bona, I want to kind of turn to you. Under CARE, actually with CARE, sorry, you've done a lot of really interesting work in the fintech space in Indonesia. And that fintech space, as you described when we were talking before, was not just about access to technology, but eventually led to improved decision-making amongst women. And there are some really amazing things that have happened with the work that you've done. It'd be great to kind of hear from you on your experiences and pick up on Aisha's thread on not just the access to internet, but then what does it mean after you provide that basic access? What are the kind of more nuanced pieces that are there?
Okay, thank you. Very glad to be here. So I think picking up on what Aisha has explained, we have similar experience. I think one of the things that have been highlighted during this COVID experience is that how the digital divide is real, even though we've been hearing and reading stuff on this, particularly related to women's access. So in Indonesia, we have a program that deals with women as a result of the economic impact of COVID. Some of them have lost their jobs, and many families are also suffering because they're not able to meet their basic needs. And therefore, we have two types of programs that uses the cash assistance modalities. And each one of these, we have two types of this cash assistance, use some form of technology. Let me explain the first one, which is the cash voucher assistance. So this is a assistance to women and their families to meet their basic needs, not just on non-food items. As we know that during the pandemic, kids are no longer learning in schools, but they're learning at home. And this actually places a lot of hardship on families because it costs money to buy the internet credits. So through this cash voucher assistance, we provided the capital using technology, working with a fintech firm on the distribution of those assistance. So the interesting thing is, the first one is that when we listed the items for them to purchase with this voucher, is that we worked with the women for them to identify the list. So it came up to about 75 items, including food items and non-food items. And based on that, we worked with this fintech firm to identify the shops and the vendors that would provide those items, and the women can go to those shops to purchase the stuff that they need. And they can do that anytime during a period of 3 to 6 months. And the technology that they use is biometrics. So it doesn't need for these women to actually possess handphones. All they need is to actually come to the shops, and then they'll scan the face based on the pictures that they've been the shops have been provided for, and there's an identification, and then they can immediately shop. So the thing that actually we found very useful, and for the women also very gratifying, is that they're in control of what they can actually use the assistance for. They can do it anytime, and it's definitely guaranteed it will meet the family needs. Because there are other types of cash assistance where they're given the cash, but they're not in control, and their partners or their husband will immediately ask for, okay, where's the money that you just got from the post office, or that we just withdraw from your account? And so this limits what the money can be used for, but it's definitely based on identification of needs from the women. And that gives them that control. It also allows them to do that with, even though it's using technology, they don't necessarily have to possess the tools, because one of the things that we also identified during the needs assessment, that not all women actually have their own handphones. Many of them share it with their partners. So this is one of the reasons why we use this biometrics technology, is to actually allow them to freely come to the shops without having to carry a specific tool. So that's one type of technology that we use. The second one is the cash for work. So we're actually collaborating with UN Women on this one. So a number of our beneficiaries who are actually who used to work in the garment sector, many of them were laid off last year. And so we work with them to provide capital assistance so that they can start their own business. Since many of them came from the garment sector, they started the home-based garment industry, producing masks, and based on the sales, they actually gain income. So one of the things that we introduced to them is how do they actually, going forward, can sustain the business. And so they need to learn business development. So we connected them to We Learn, which is a platform powered by UN Women. It's a platform for women who aspire to become entrepreneurs, even though they have never started business. It's a very easy to use interactive platform. And based on what they have learned, some of the women's groups have actually now started to, one, they have learned how to do online marketing. they have actually started to expand their products, because they know that, you know, you won't be using masks forever. But even just on masks, they have come up with creative designs, etc., because they looked at, you know, all kinds of online shops. And I think that's one of the things that they have, it has opened up opportunities for them to learn, access, and use that information for their own growth. And even though we have not used fully technology in terms of how we transfer their wage, we hope that in the future, we're in the process of discussing this, how this can actually be used in a similar manner as we did with the cash voucher assistance. Again, this is to ensure control over those resources. But one of the things that I think I'd like to highlight, and this can be also be part of our discussion and recommendation going forward. Most of the women that we work with are working in set peri-urban areas and some in villages, but it's still reachable, even though the connection is not always great, but at least they can still connect. But there are many parts of our country, just like I think in many parts of countries where we all work in, that are unreachable. There's not even electricity sometimes. So I think one of the things that we found, and we have also a location where we try to work with children to provide online education, but it's not as easy. How do we actually harness through platforms like that we're engaged in right now, private sector, those that are actually in the business of providing technology? How do we engage them to expand, widen that access? Should we do it through impact investment types of methodologies, or the PPP type, work with government and private sector? What is our role there? And I believe that, you know, schemes like impact investments can actually, gender lens impact investment can actually make a difference if we actually work and partner with private sector that are engaged in technology provision, as well as benefit the women who are not able to actually access those technology at this moment. Maybe I'll stop there, and maybe we can discuss further later. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bona. In fact, you touched on a number of very good things, including like cross-sectoral partnerships and kind of the more, you know, meat of how do you do something like this? What are the logistical issues? You know, you mentioned your own example of how you're working with fintech firms. So that's really great. And hopefully we'll get the opportunity to circle back to that. But speaking of kind of more on-ground experiences, Sonika, I wanted to turn to you in terms of, you know, your own experiences in Nepal with women and with micro-enterprise work that you're doing, getting more into like the more programmatic side, more implementation side. What are the gaps and opportunities that you see in providing access to internet for women?
Thank you, Rwitwika, and thank you, organizers, for giving me space to talk today. And first and foremost, I'd like to apologize. There might be some background noise in between that I don't have control over, so sorry about that. Yes, so as Rwitwika mentioned, I work with a lot of women micro-enterprises, women micro-entrepreneurs here in Nepal, mostly in the sectors such as electric vehicles and agriculture, which we have seen there are a lot of women informal micro-entrepreneurs. I'm really enjoying the discussions that's going here. Aisha mentioned about it, and also Bona just now, she mentioned about financial access and also about financial independence and financial health, right? That's exactly what we have been working here. I'd like to start with examples. So we work with women micro-entrepreneurs in electric vehicle sector, and one of them is her name is Devi, and she is one of the electric minibus driver and also owns that minibus. So I was talking with her recently, and what I found was she was struggling. I mean, she started as a driver, not owning any kind of vehicle, but then she earned, and she was able to earn 2 minibus right now. And she actually brought back her husband from abroad to drive this second minibus, right? So she was super empowered because of the kind of business ownership she had. But one of the problem that she is facing right now is her second minibus is just lying there in garage because she cannot afford the finance to upgrade the vehicle battery. That's why it's just sitting there in garage. And this sector that I'm talking right now is 25 years old. 25 years back, actually, this electric minibus public transportation sector made our city, Kathmandu city, a green city pioneer. And it's quite unique because in the sea of male-run public transportation option, this sector was the only one that was all driven by women, and there were 714 of them. I was only 5 years old then, and I'm now 31, but the sector is still the same, or I would like to say even dying slow death. I don't see a lot of women driving these minibus, and I tried to find out what happened to this sector. I mean, Nepal having such huge hydropower potential of 43,000 megawatts, and it's still, importing $1.8 billion worth fossil fuel, and most of that is just going to transportation sector. And again, right now we are really, really struggling with air pollution, and these electric minibuses really contributing to really tackle that, right? So what really happened to this beautiful industry run by women micro-entrepreneurs? So we found that the main issue was this older technology that's 25 years old is struggling to upgrade to newer technology. For example, they used to run with this lead acid battery in the past, which is not working for them right now because they have to change it every 6 months, and it costs around $4,500 US. There's better batteries available now, which is environment friendly and which is durable, but then the upfront investment is very, very high. It costs around 10,000 USD, which means the microloans are not feasible for that anymore, right? Which means they have to go to formal financial institutions. And all the stories that I've heard in the field is banks don't trust them. This conventional financial system where they need the proof that you are earning, and then the proof that you will be able to repay, for example, the collateral and the credit history, that's not readily available for women, at least here in Nepal and probably also in Southeast Asia, is that usually they don't own any property to put as a collateral so that the banks, the formal institution, can trust them. Which is why we saw that conventional or the traditional way of access to finance was not working for women, or it is not really designed for women, right? And as Bona mentioned earlier, it was quite interesting to hear that, there are women accessing finance from bank, but then when they go back home, their husbands would usually take that money, right? They don't have control over that finance. There is financial system, they can have access to finance, but then what happens after the money goes out of the bank, right? So we saw that, and we saw that the trust was the factor between the funders and these borrowers, women borrowers. So we decided to build a fintech platform. So my startup's name is Aeloi. We believe that finance and technology together is stronger together. So we decided to build this platform where we use digital tokens to disperse this loan, so that the end use of loan can be monitored, so that the funders have more trust. So we are trying to build this alternative ways of trust building between these micro entrepreneurs and the banks, or any kind of public financing, right? It can be cash transfers, it can be loans, or even just donations. We really have seen that the monitoring cost that goes into tracking that fund is really, really high, which is why we talk about a lot of impact investment, climate finance, right? But it really does not reach to the hands of grassroots climate ninjas like Devi, who have been working in this beautiful electric minibus sector and contributing towards tackling this huge global challenge such as climate change. But then she haven't been able to even access finance, even though she is saying that I'm going to repay with the interest, right? But then they have to really rely on very high interest rates, such as 36%, and that means really a vicious cycle, debt cycle for them. So we thought that, if the monitoring cost is very high for you to really go deep into grassroots level and give that fund to them, then we'll make a chain, we'll make a digital link between the funders and the borrowers, or the funded, I'd like to say, where you can see the platform will tell where the money is right now, where these women micro entrepreneurs are actually spending the money. You will see which vendors that they are using, and then you will see where it is going, whether it is going to some alcohol shop, or whether they are buying some TV or consumption, or it is actually going to the business. So the core of our platform is to say that we will help women micro entrepreneurs access affordable finance using digital tokens, so that they can actually spend that money in the business. I also actually have the same experience from the field that Bona mentioned earlier. We did a 6-month smaller pilot back in 2019. So after the pilot, we're just casually interviewing the women micro entrepreneurs, and one of them was sharing her experience, and she said, usually when I get a loan from this cooperative or microfinance, I go back home and my husband would ask, where's the money? And she didn't have control over that, right? Because it wasn't cash. But because of these digital tokens, which is actually dispersed through SMS, I'll get to that point why we chose SMS in a bit. So this time around, she got the loan and it was in her phone, and she went back home. Her husband again asked her, did you get the loan? She said yes. And where's the loan? And she just showed her phone, like, here is my loan, and you can't really take it, right? You can't really use it to have alcohol and stuff. So we saw that it was actually really empowering women to have control over their own finances, and also the financial discipline, because now they can't use it for consumption. That means that it has to go to business, which really compels them to think about the business plan early on. So it's not enforced financial discipline, otherwise it would probably have not worked, but because it is unintentionally built by this ecosystem, it really ensured that they are financially disciplined. And one of the reasons why we chose SMS was because we wanted to make it inclusive for these grassroots micro entrepreneurs. We saw in the field that they were really scared of apps or even internet, even though they have smartphones. So we said that, okay, we'll make a technology for you to use that can be used from smartphone to dumb phone, whichever phone you have, or even though you only have SIM cards, it works, right? Which is why we chose that. I mean, for me as a computer engineer, it's not very difficult to build an app. It's actually easier than to build SMS platform. But since our motto is to build and design for women and putting women at the center of our design, we decided to go with SMS platform, and that's actually working because it seems like it's friendly to them, and we can definitely help them graduate from being SMS user to app user in future. So that has been a very beautiful success story. And again, ending at the note of Devi, whose story I shared earlier, she will be receiving a very, very affordable finance using digital token very soon, so that her second electric minibus will run on the road very soon. So that's on that note, I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sonika. In fact, you hit on a lot of really interesting themes, one of which is access to finance, kind of getting into the meat of things in terms of also ownership of being able to run a business. And it's not just about, having internet in your hands, it's about how do you have that ecosystem to then make that an asset. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing the story on Devi. One of the themes that has been consistent throughout all of our speakers today has been on policy and policy making. And so we have Honorable Minister Mondo here today with us. And sir, what I'd love to ask for you is from the policymakers' perspective, you know, being the Minister for Youth and Children, one of the impediments, which I think Kira mentioned, was about access to education, access to universities, having the fundamentals to be able to then work, be able to use internet and technology. So Honorable Minister, when it comes to STEM and when it comes to education for young girls and children in science and technology, what do you think the role of policymaking can be in that space?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely delighted to join you in the Gender Equity Forum. And I pay special respect to the UN fraternity and especially UN Women for having organized a forum through which critical issues that affect our women, that affect our girls, can be discussed. And these can only be anchored within policy and legal frameworks. There are lots of things that we can do with technology, with innovation, and there are lots of things we can miss out because we don't have access to innovation, we don't have access to technology, and therefore we lag behind that way because of the constraints that we find along the way. But what are some of these constraints that we need to deal with? First and foremost, before we talk about how the policy can be streamlined, I think the barriers are cultural, attitudinal, situational, and institutional. Therefore, solutions are varied from the household level, talk about the household policy, from the communities, ministries, parliament, and cabinet. We live in a world where if we are going to ease the lives of our women and girls, there is no way we can escape technology. We are talking about application of technology in women accessing finance. We are talking about application of technology in women accessing water, power. You know, in Africa, our women spend a lot of time looking for water, fetching firewood. If we have technology that can save and free women's time to do other more important things, then we are getting there. Technology that is important is technology that helps women to access goods and services easily by the prick of a button. Eases production. Are we still using a hoe to ensure that we produce the food that we have to serve? The multitude of children that we do produce in Africa, and everybody knows that Africa, one of the things we do very well is the production of human beings. That one we do very well. Are we having technology that saves time in reporting violence? Because once violence is meted on a woman or a girl, a lot of time is wasted. There'll be about 4 people to look after this injured woman. Can we have an app that facilitates, like we have in Uganda, an app? We have one on Uganda Child Hotline. It's easy to report any cases online of child abuse. We have SafePal to report cases of GBV as and when they have acted in real time, and that saves time. We are talking about all these technologies that can help us report these cases. Now, under COVID-19, one of the things we could not run away from was the issue of education. Education. Are we having technology democratized to the extent that in our villages, my people can access an app, can access electricity, and therefore can use technology to do the things we do in the urban areas? Unfortunately, our access to electricity in our country is still low. But thank God, we are doing a lot of rural electrification to ensure that every corner, every part of the Republic of Uganda has access to electricity. Talk about our country being a country where majority of our people are in the gardens. In Uganda, we have a gardening app whereby UN Women has supported market women to come up with an online innovation called Gardening App, which enables women in markets to access online markets for their products. This enables women to increase their sales, but also to sell their products at not giveaway prices, because they have access to information, how is the market doing, and therefore this helps greatly to help our women get out of their poverty without being misled by some male chauvinistic people that are up to getting the profits without thinking about what a woman goes through in terms of production, and therefore having a right to access the right places in the right market at the right time and without losing anything. But we need, very importantly, to deconstruct the thinking of parents and our communities about girls and younger women's broader roles in society. That girls can do what boys can do, and even do it better if they are supported and given opportunities. Even at early age, encouraging their innovation through play in very critical areas. The type of play materials that our mothers give us determine the nature of socialization we go through. If I'm going to give a doll, a doll of a baby to my daughter, then my daughter is likely to think that she's a machine that produces children, and therefore that's her role. And at the same time, I give a pistol or a truck to my boy child to show that you are supposed to be involved in protection, but also in driving the cars around. And that socialization does us a great injustice. And therefore, we need to start there in early childhood development. What are the things we do to our girls while they are young? What do these girls see their mothers doing? And what do the boys see their fathers doing? Because if, for instance, we have a child who is going to live in a home where the father and mother are always fighting, those two people, the girl and boy, when they grow up, they will be equally violent. We have poverty sometimes going to the extreme. I think in Uganda, we have 21.4% people living below the poverty line. We have come up with some safeguards, like a SAGE. SAGE, this is money we pass on to the old people who no longer have anybody to help them. In Uganda, we don't believe in institutionalization of older people. We believe that even when they are old, they need to live within the communities where they have been living, there they feel more protected. But sending them some money monthly to be able to access medicine, to be able to access transport is very helpful. And we are using technology. We are using mobile money. We are using postal services to ensure that all the people age of 60 and above have access to this money. So technology is one of the things that's helping us to cut on some of the things that really are hindering progress. But we should also at the same time emphasize more what education means to the girl child and our broader national development objectives, ensuring that every girl enrolls in school at the right age and completes all levels of education. This also entails creating a safe and secure environment for them to learn and succeed. When we did realize as policymakers that some of the people up to now can take a decision to either take the boy or the girl child to school, we said no. Let's have universal primary education, whereby you are not constrained to pay school fees, and therefore you automatically take both Jane and John to go and study. There is nothing that empowers a person like education. Education, fixes all the gaps that we can talk about. And therefore, this has helped us. We have graduated from there to take it further to universal secondary education, to ensure that the girl child is spending more time at school, because that also addresses these other vices like early childhood, like early pregnancy, like early marriages. If the girl is going to stay long at school, then she's saved from dropping out of school, and therefore the human capital that is very critical to the socio-economic development of the country is lost.
Sure.
And in our National Development Plan 3, we are emphasizing the importance of human capital development, and we shall go whatever distance to ensure that that is done.
Honorable Minister, I hate to cut you off, but we're just a little tight on time. So if we could kind of get towards the key points, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me end by emphasizing some of the programs that have been guided by the policies that we have put in place to ensure that we make the girls flourish, for instance, to ensure that we check the excesses where they have inadequacies in skills. We have emphasized that we do skilling for the girl child, just as we do for the boy child. We have ensured that we do close the digital gap. There's still a number of things that we have to do, but we are moving there. We are not where we want to be, but we are not where we were yesterday. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was very helpful. And in fact, that creates a really good segue to Lulu. And in terms of, your experiences in Mexico, and essentially, you've heard honorable ministers speak about the policy ecosystem at large, and not just about, not just it being an intervention, which is about technology or the private sector or kind of the convergence. There has to be an ecosystem. So Lulu, you had a very interesting perspective when it came to Mexico, and the fact that it's not just about access to technology. What happens next to women is really important. It'd be great to get your perspective on what you've seen in your experience in Mexico.
Thank you a lot. First, I want to start by the good news. I think in Mexico and Latin America, and for sure across the world, we are going through one of the most powerful and inspiring moments of feminism worldwide. And I have no doubt this has been powered by access, but equally important because of creative appropriation of technologies by women. So to the question of what does internet access does for girls, women, and other communities, I will say two keywords. One, liberation, and second, autonomy. I think the potential to decide for yourself, to nurture and diversify your life project, the possibility to imagine and expand. So in Luchadoras, we've been working the last couple of years to challenge misogyny online, but much more important, to spread inspiring stories of powerful women changing the world, because we believe that that's the transformative potential of the internet. But we are very clear that technology is not the only contributor to achieve this change in itself, and it's part of a context. And that's the importance of public policy, as you were saying. That is a set of complex and intertwined elements are playing a role in this game. This is the cultural, the social, and the economic conditions we need to transform. So it's not just about access to the internet, but changing the systemic structures that lie behind it. So the online and the on-ground are not detached. All the contrary, they are a continuum. The virtual is real, if not even hyper-real. And internet and technologies have this double potential. One side, as I was saying, a transformative potential, a potential to reimagine and transform. And we've listened to very inspiring and grassroots stories of this type of change that can help to reimagine and transform social norms that perpetuate those inequalities and also violence against women. But on the other hand, they can also replicate it. We need to be very clear and see it through. Technologies are also replicating and worsening disparities, inequalities, and gender violence. And we need to think about this topic, to research, to invest, and develop public policies, to strengthen response by governments and also by social platforms. Corporations have a strong role in here. They know what's happening at their spaces, and they need to invest the same amount of resources they are getting from all our data into proposing creative solutions to make those spaces safe for women and other communities. So what does this mean? It means asking the difficult questions. We need to celebrate the power of technology, but we need also to challenge technology, because we also been seeing how is more and more on the hands of big corporations, and they remain largely unquestioned, let's say. So for example, we need to transcend and problematize sample numbers. In Mexico, if you look at surveys purely from a quantitative level, you will see that 51% of total internet users are women. So you'll say, wow, let's celebrate this rate. But no, this figure, even though it may look like celebratory or positive, it's very complex still. It doesn't mean that just because we are more users of the internet, we have meaningful access or an access free of violence. In some of the research that Luchadoras we've been carried out over the last couple of years, we've seen how more than access to infrastructure, we need to think, one, the quality of use, and second, the type of appropriation. Do women recognize themselves as creators of the internet? According to the National Use, for example, the National Survey of Use of Time in Mexico, women invest much more time than men in care work inside the household. So how much time do they have to use the internet for recreative or educational purpose to nurture themselves? So this is, again, we need to challenge and change the systemic inequalities that prevail in larger society. Again, another example. In research we carried out in Luchadoras for the 2011 elections in Mexico, we saw but the very first time, equal participation by women in candidacies. So very positive news. But during campaigns, women experienced online attacks, which were a real obstacle for them to compete or to contend in equal conditions. So online attacks such as doxing, discredit, non-consensual dissemination of intimate images, all types of threats, they were facing that. Even though they were participating in equal numbers, they were facing a very hostile environment online. 62% of those attacks we registered had a gender bias. In many cases, they were sexualized aggressions. So again, as I was saying, the online and the on-ground are very much connected. And we've been seeing how in technology, those systemic forms of violence are being reproduced against women. So we've seen in Luchadoras how the transformative potential of the internet is at risk because of online violence against women. Online attacks, we have a helpline. We responded to more than 400 requests last year. We've seen how online attacks are getting much more sophisticated with the time. And sadly, we are not seeing the same level of sophistication in the responses. Responses by decision makers or responses by internet intermediaries. So we need to, again, keep asking for accountability. For example, also, again, our latest research shows that after passing a great deal of legislation to counter non-consensual dissemination of intimate images in Mexico, more than 2,000 women have filed complaints across the country after being attacked with the dissemination of their intimate images. But 83% of those complaints remain under investigation. So we need to invest in developing specialized knowledge, protocols, resources, dedicated staff to prevent, give attention, and sanction online violence against women. So just to close, I will say that simultaneously, yes, we need to celebrate the great advantages and the transformative potential of technologies, but also we need to keep asking for accountability, keep asking for innovative solutions to keep that space that the internet represents to transform gender discrimination, gender inequalities, violence against women, to have creative solutions and effective solutions that can respond to the current challenges. We need also to transcend the functional approach on digital education. We need to have a critical approach in digital education. We need to think also about technologies, not just as tools to have a better development, but we need to think about technologies as a political exercise. We need to think about technologies as tools for change, to really challenge and transform the different systems of oppressions, such as capitalism, racism, sexism, white supremacy. It's not just speaking about how many women can become CEOs in Silicon Valley, but how can we build communitarian alternatives from the grassroots? We can use technology also not to reproduce systems of inequalities, but to appropriate them to challenge the roots of such systems and build the alternative worlds based on disruptive models that can actually help reshape the new worlds that we want, the worlds that we imagine. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lulu. And thank you again for kind of closing on that note about policy and essentially about what the ecosystem is and how do we support that. Keeping that in mind, I actually wanted to open it up to a few questions which have already been curated. So let me do this. Let me pose a question and kind of just request some of the panelists to respond. And we have a few questions. So I'm hoping all panelists get to respond to at least one of the questions. So the first one is on policymaking, and essentially to go ahead and to propose 2 or 3 core policies which can help overcome the gap in access to technology and gender divide and other inequalities, including intersectionality. So Aisha, why don't we start with you? Minister Mondo would love to get your thoughts, and Kira, it'd be great if you could also respond to that. So Aisha, why don't we start with you in terms of what are 2-3 key policy recommendations which you would have for overcoming the digital divide?
Thank you, Rwitwika. I think based on all the important issues that have been highlighted in the discussion today, it's just been so inspiring to listen to all the panelists. We are not talking about 1 or 2 issues here. We're talking about multiple issues and factors, multiple challenges and constraints that have been discussed that need to be addressed through the policies and through the legislation also, because some of the issues also touch upon that. So what we heard from the panelists today is about the entire ecosystem. It's about making sure that when we talk about technology, there's also access to finance. There's also also initiatives to deal with the social and institutional barriers. So when we talk about gender responsive policies, I would assume that it's something that has to be based on all of these issues, so that women get to benefit from digital technologies equitably and also safely. Because we just heard from so many panelists here about the issues of safety, digital safety, about the harassment, about issues that women are facing online. So in terms of policies, I think it's just so important to pay attention to all of these issues, that while we look at technologies as tools, we also have to see how it is expanding women's access to knowledge and education, and about supporting them in using technology in a safe manner. So from a policy perspective, I would say that paying attention to all of these issues to make sure that there's a conducive ecosystem available for women to make best use of the technologies that are available to them.
Thank you for that, Aisha. That's very helpful. Minister Mondo, recommendations. You're actually in the policymaking seat, so things that you would really like to make sure happens.
Thank you very much. I think it's important it's important for us to adopt an asset-based approach to girls' inclusion. We should not look at girls who are ready to see things being implemented, but we want to see them championing their own causes. And therefore, facilitating them to do that is extremely important, either through rural modeling, where they are looking at women who have done it, and also coming in to do something by themselves so that they are not targets to be met, but they are players in their own, in the things that challenge them. I think that's extremely critical. But also it is important that every time we see a girl child excelling somewhere, we need to celebrate those achievements. And by so doing, I think this will help other girls to say, if she can make it, then I can make it, or I can even do it better. But also popularizing leadership of women and girls is extremely critical. We have done that in Uganda. We continue to do it. We are not yet there. At least we have a speaker of parliament who is a woman. She has been for the 2 terms. We had a vice president who was a woman. And all these, the speaker is a lawyer, but the vice president who was a doctor and remains a doctor. So I think it's important to continue building these role models to hope the young girls know that they can do what the other women have done. I thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Minister. Kiera, you have actually, from an intersectionality point of view, what do you think? Policy recommendations?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's very important to think about what are the conditions that are currently making making slow the access to infrastructure, right? So I do want to highlight how it is important to, and this is speaking from a global South perspective, trans feminine perspective, which is the inclusion, more than the inclusion, the full integration of trans people into these conversations. But as people who are the policymakers, who are the integral leaders of this process, you know, because what often takes place is that our institutions tend to have like these ideas about what policies could work for certain groups of people, but they're not involving these people right from the start. So that is something very important to consider. Funding as well, because funding is essential to keep moving into access to technology. And actually, I wanted to highlight this. Lulu said about how technology is very important to nurture and diversify life projects. And you know, for trans women, for trans feminine people of color, there's usually like a path, which is sex work, you know. And I think that access to technology, and especially at these times, it's essential in showcasing how there are other alternatives for those who do not want to engage in sex work, you know. And which is also important that we think about how we build infrastructures, who are we providing the funding for creating these infrastructures, and who are our trans leaders out there that are willing to engage in this laborious process. And also as well to consider the perspectives of trans sex workers and what that would mean for them to build these infrastructures, and how they can make their work better, easier, and more comfortable understanding as well that that's a very complex issue that I'm sure trans sex workers can also provide more info on that.
Thank you, Kira. I wanted to go ahead and ask a question, actually pick up from what you said and ask a question to Bona and to Lulu. Something that our audience asked, how do you influence donors to get more involved in the area of gender sensitive technology and women's access to technology, specifically increasing grants to end-line beneficiaries? So Bona, from a CARE perspective, any thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you. So I think we're more and more now, particularly with the adoption of Agenda 2030, which forms the pathway for the next 10 years of CARE's agenda. We are putting more and more emphasis on this gender equality in all aspects. And we realize, of course, COVID highlighted this much more, and it provided the opportunities to actually boost support on technological use in our projects, including for gender equality. As I said, for cash for work, the cash assistance, and even just to connect girls among themselves during COVID, because a lot of them suffer loneliness as well as abuse within their household. So how do you connect them to services that were shut down during the pandemic? So I think that this is an opportunity. COVID had brought us a lot of hardships and challenges, but it also provides us opportunities. We started dialoguing with our donors, but also interestingly, I think I like the word that Lulu used about accountability, but using this word accountability as well as an opportunity to engage private sector, particularly those that are working in the tech firms, to actually be responsible and be engaged and be supportive. So I think there are two types of donors or investors that I would propose to be part of the solution going forward. Is one, as we work with the traditional donors in our projects through our grants and really influence them and showcase what does it mean to have technology for these women, giving the examples of like what Aisha had given and Sonika, but also at the same time, how do you engage the non-traditional donors, investors? These are the biggest, these are the ones that actually influence the direction of the future as well. So I think we should have that dialogue. And I think I mentioned earlier about impact investment. We are currently engaged in a similar scheme. It's not focused on technology, but again, you can use any kind of cost to actually engage those donors and investors to push for a certain cause, in this case, technological inclusion. So let me stop there.
Thank you for that, Bona. Lulu.
Excuse me. I'm wondering, good morning. I'm wondering if I'm part of this discussion. I've been here for more than an hour and I've not been given an opportunity to speak.
I'm so sorry.
I've raised up my hand since. I've used 2 phones to raise up my hands.
I'm so sorry. Ms. Agbor?
I'm the commissioner, African Union Commission.
Okay, well,
Sarah Anyang Agbor.
It's a pleasure having you, ma'am. Given your background, we would love to hear from you on what you think about the policy ecosystem in terms of women having access to internet and technology. I know we're a little tight on time, but I know we'll value your opinion. So please.
I beg your pardon.
I know we're a little tight on time, but I know we'll value your opinion. So please, ma'am, what do you think of the role of women having access to internet and technology?
Thank you very much. I've listened to all the speakers speak, and I know that we've been revolving around the importance of internet, digital transformation, technology to empower the women. And for us in the African Union, we have what they call the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. And that strategy was set up to strengthen women's empowerment. But out of that, as the Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation in Africa, we came up with what they call the Digital Transformation Strategy that was adopted by the head of states in 2020 at the 2020 summit. And that, as part of that digital transformation strategy, we came up with the other arm of it, that is the one on education, where we adopted the DOTSS framework, that is the DOTS, the DOTSS framework, because I've heard speakers talking about the need for safe online safety, security, and protection of the women. And that the D stands for digital transformation, O for online safety, and then the T for teacher training professionals, because if the teachers are not well trained, they cannot go into the teacher training, the digital transformation, and then safety online, safety offline, and skills, competencies. That is what we need to empower the women of today. Like we've heard, they talk about e-banking, etc., commercialization and all that, but all that also have to depend on the mindset. And as the minister from Uganda rightly said, it is very important that when we want to empower the women, we need to look at the policy framework. And those policy frameworks are determined by those who lead. And as far as I'm concerned, the people who lead, if the political vision has a will for transformation, they will be able to empower the woman. So the internet can empower the woman because it is easy. Wherever you are, wherever you are, whatever time, you go virtual. You can be able to do certain businesses on your own, have confidence in yourself. Like I listened to the question of people able to have e-money. Women who cannot control their own money have no voice in their homes. So to be able to control your own money, you must have a safety network. And that is why it was important that they put the money on the phone where the man cannot access it. But over and above that, I believe that the mindset, the gender role stereotyping need to change, the education, and then ownership of you yourself. Having self-esteem, self-dignity, self-value for yourself is very important. And that is where we need to start. Debunking patriarchal stereotypes. When we debunk the patriarchal stereotypes, then the people will be able to start appreciating themselves. Like I heard one of my sisters saying that you give dolls to women and then you give guns to men. Like that, you're already doing what they call gender stereotyping. And innately, the child acquires that. But if you give them the opportunity to be able to venture and do what they want, they'll be able to succeed in what they do. So in the African Union, they have different protocols that they have put in place because gender equality is inherently linked to sustainable development and is vital to the realization of human rights for all. And that is why we have said that the African Women's Decade on Financial and Economic Inclusion for African Women was declared for 2020 to 2030, because it's very, very important. And in this declaration, African leaders have recommitted to scale up actions for the progressive gender inclusion towards sustainable development at the national, regional, and continental levels. So with this decade, we hope to have equal opportunities for financial independence through work or through setting up businesses, as well as the ability to enjoy equal access to education. Because you restrained my time, so I will not be able to speak more than that, since you said we're tight on time.
I know there's a lot of questions on policymaking, so let me do this. Let me ask Subha and then you to speak on a question which has come up about internet as being a fundamental human right. So Subha, let me turn to you, and then I'd love to turn back to you, Ms. Agbor. Lulu, we'll come back to you on the question of fundraising and how to kind of approach donors and funders. So Subha, in terms of internet as a basic human right, thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a really excellent question, and I think it kind of goes back to what what we were saying, that technology, that we need to understand technology beyond simply as a tool, beyond simply as sort of instrumental in the advancement of gender equality, right? In fact, if we understand it as a kind of just a really critical part of the world in which we are, living, and within which we sort of experience things, then I think it's much easier to understand that not just access, but as many of the speakers have said, being able to be safe, being able to advocate for your rights, being able to have a voice. Being able to, to be taken seriously when you express yourself, right? To not be discredited, to not be harassed, to not be stigmatized when you speak up, etc. All of those things are kind of intertwined as being what the experience really of a free and equitable internet should be, right? And is for some people who, are in positions of privilege and power. So I think that the reason that the internet is a human right is because it is a critical part of the way in which we experience life, and we experience, injustice, and it's it's an axis along which kind of injustice is is being metered, but it's also an axis along which injustice is being resisted, right? So I think on that level, I definitely would be an advocate for seeing not just access, but the ability to really inhabit and be on the internet as being a fundamental right that everyone has.
And that's really interesting. I mean, your perspective and take is really fascinating, especially given your background. Ms. Agbor, if you're still there, we'd love to loop back to you. Are you there, ma'am? Okay, I think she might have stepped out. Oh, you're here. Okay, great. Yes. So I think you're on mute. So one thing which we'd love to kind of circle back to you on is picking up from what just Subha said in terms of internet as being a basic human right. Where do you fundamentally stand on that?
The world has gone digital, and the internet is one basic common place that the world has gone digital. And I believe, like she said, it should be a human right, because what is the purpose of the internet? It is to make us access the world and access basic needs. Because now with the internet, there are different forms. You do WhatsApp, you can talk to your family. Just imagine if a girl child is married at the age of 13 and she's not able to get back to her parents, and they're married to an old man, a man who is above 50, above 40, even above 30. How will she communicate to her people that she's going through some injustices in her marital home? Because when you get married, you go away with the man. And then most often the African community, the parents don't often go to visit. So I believe that the internet can actually give access, can actually give voice to the voiceless, and then can actually educate in its own way. Because you can Google, you can get to know so many other things within it. So it should be, technology should not just be the rights of certain favored people, but we should be able to give it to everybody. Take, for example, what COVID has done. What COVID has done is to open our eyes to the need of being digitally empowered in all areas. Now we are talking about online learning. How many kids are actually being educated through that online learning? How many kids, even within the city, have access to internet or have access to connectivity? And then we say that we're going virtual. We're going virtual is just lip service. It's just mouth service. What have we put in place to go virtual? We need infrastructure. Like I listened to some of the women presenting. They spoke about bridging the digital divide. It is very, very important. But how do we go about bridging the digital divide? It is to have the infrastructures. How do we need to have infrastructures? Is to form synergies. The Ministry of Education working with the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Infrastructure to provide these basic needs. It has become a basic need. And that is why I believe that the internet has become a basic right for everybody. So it is about us looking at our policies, but not just speaking policies, but walking the talk, going beyond rhetoric, actually putting action on the ground. And if we do that, then the internet can become a basic right for everybody. Because the millions of children in Africa, most of them are well located in the rural areas. Education is going for those, for the rich who have money. Because you have money, you can get a laptop, a phone, internet connectivity for your child. But the people who don't have it, how do they access it? So this word of inclusivity will not actually be, we will not be able to achieve it if we don't bridge the digital divide, working with telecommunication companies, mobile companies to provide cheap, accessible connectivity for everybody to be able to have access to it. So that's my own point of view, because it's what we've been discussing with the ministers of education since April 30th, 2020, that COVID came. How do you actually go beyond rhetoric, walk the talk to say that there is actually a bridging of that connectivity? And some of them have gone back to the local ways of communication, using the community centers in the rural areas to teach, using the radio to teach, etc. But again, it is difficult because the most important part is for every child to be able to have access to a laptop or to a phone. where they can actually have connectivity. And it's just like when you tune in your radio, you don't need to pay the radio company to tune in your radio. You just need to have your radio. How is it possible for us to also have internet connectivity that the children can just tune in and have access to connectivity to go on online teaching, etc.? So I think what she has said is very important, and we need to work on it to make sure that we can cut across the board for children to have access to the internet and to be able to empower themselves, particularly the girl child.
Great. Thank you for that. That was very powerful. Really appreciate it, ma'am. I actually wanted to, we have about a minute left, so I wanted to close with Lulu and Sonika. One of the things that I'll take from Bona, she mentioned that, COVID is not just a time for when there were issues, but also a time to reinvent ourselves and to think more critically about what the issues are and how do we improve on that. With that in mind, Lulu, Sonika, as young members of our panel, what do you think the future holds as we reinvent ourselves in the post-pandemic world for women and digital divide? What are the opportunities, gaps? What do you think? If you could just take a minute each, and then we can close the session. So Lulu, I'll start with you.
Well, I just want to reiterate one of the previous responses we've shared, which is we need a digital education and an education overall that recognize people and women and girls, people from different communities as agents. We need to overcome protective perspectives that build barriers. Safety is not about building a barrier. Safety is about having the capacities to feel that you are on your own to take your decisions and transform. So some of the main responses against, for example, non-consensual dissemination of intimate images is telling women, don't take the photo, don't do this, instead of enabling them to recognize and have information and enabling them to decide what they want, regardless what's the decision. So I think we need to have that in mind, information for decision with autonomy and freedom.
Thank you, Lulu. That was very powerful. Thank you for that. Sonika.
I'd like to press on one of the issue. I mean, COVID have forced everyone to go digital, right? But I always ask this question that what percentage of the world are we talking about? What percentage of the world are ready to go digital? So we really need to include those who are in the grassroots, who does not have access to any digital tools, and make sure that they are not left out in this digital revolution that caused by COVID. So which is why, I mean, I myself or my company, or I also urge a lot of others who are working with the grassroots to really build technology that's accessible to the grassroots so that they feel included as well, and not just feel, but also empowered to use it and not take it as something scary, right? So that they can really take the first step. Yeah.
Great. Those are some wonderful insights. With that, I know we're 2 minutes over, but I just wanted to summarize by saying there's just been so many diverging views, different views in terms of how do you overcome this divide? What are the opportunities, success stories from the ground, and what are some of the policy changes? And Minister Mondo, you rightly mentioned, we've started on the path. We're somewhere along the way, but we still have a ways to go. With that in mind, I wanted to thank all the panelists. This was such a reinvigorating conversation, and it has just been such a pleasure having this dialogue with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, panelists. It's been just such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.